There are moments in life when you stand in front of a situation that doesn't make sense. Doors are closed, resources are low, people have walked away, and everything around you is telling you this cannot be done. The doctor's report says it's impossible. Your bank account says it's impossible. Your past says it's impossible. Even your own mind starts whispering, give up. But what you must understand is that impossibility is not a limitation for God. It is an invitation for him to step in. See, we often evaluate our situations based on what we can do. We measure the outcome by our strength, our knowledge, our connections. And when we reach the end of ourselves, we assume we've reached the end of a road. But God operates on a different system. He doesn't start where your strength begins. He starts where your strength ends. When the situation looks impossible, God is not intimidated. He is not confused. He is not looking for a backup plan. He is waiting for you to shift your focus from your problem to his power. Because as long as you're focused on the size of the obstacle, you will forget the size of your God. You see, God specializes in things that don't add up. He makes ways where there are no roads. He opens doors that no human hand can unlock. He brings life out of dead situations. But here's the key. You've got to trust him when you don't see him working. Faith is not about having all the answers. Faith is about believing God is still in control when nothing makes sense. Too many people walk away right before the breakthrough because the pressure got too heavy. But what if the pressure is the very thing God is using to position you for a miracle? What if the delay is not denial, but divine timing? God is not late. He is intentional. And when he moves, he doesn't just fix the problem, he reveals his glory. So don't quit in the middle of your impossibility. Don't let fear write the final chapter of your story. Stand firm, trust deeper, pray harder, because the same God who spoke light into darkness can speak possibility into your situation. And when he doesn't, nobody will be able to take the credit. It will be clear it wasn't luck, it wasn't people, it wasn't chance, it was God, because when God steps in, the impossible doesn't just become possible, it becomes a testimony. There are moments in life when you find yourself staring at a situation that feels completely out of reach. Everything about it says no. The circumstances don't line up, the resources aren't enough, and the odds are stacked so high that even thinking about overcoming them feels unrealistic. This is where most people begin to retreat. They shrink their expectations, lower their hopes, and quietly accept defeat before anything has even changed. But what feels like a dead end to you is often the very place where something greater is about to begin. What you call impossible is not a barrier to God, it is an opportunity. See, the problem is not the size of the obstacle. The problem is the way we've been trained to think about obstacles. The problem is the way we've been trained to think about obstacles. We've been conditioned to believe that if something cannot be explained, calculated, or controlled, then it cannot be achieved. So when we face something that exceeds our ability, we automatically label it as impossible and move on. But God does not operate within the limits of human reasoning. He is not restricted by what makes sense to you. In fact, God often allows situations to reach the point of impossibility so that there is no confusion about who deserves the credit when things turn around. If everything in your life worked out based on your own effort, your own intelligence, and your own intelligence, you would never truly see the hand of God at work. You would give yourself the glory. You would believe that you made it happen. So sometimes God will let you come face to face with something you cannot fix, cannot change, and cannot escape on your own. Not to break you, but to position you. Because when you are out of options, you are in the perfect position for divine intervention. Too many people see impossibility as a sign to quit, when in reality, it is a signal to shift. It's a signal to stop relying on what you can do and start trusting in what God can do. It's a signal to move from control to surrender, from fear to faith to famine to prayer. And here's the truth. God is not intimidated by your situation. He is not overwhelmed by your crisis. What looks complex to you is simple to him. What feels heavy to you is light in his hands. The same power that created the universe operates beyond the boundaries of your current problem. But the challenge is this: you have to believe that before you see it. Faith requires you to stand in the middle of uncertainty and still expect something greater. It requires you to look at a closed door and believe that it can still open. It requires you to hold on when everything in you wants to let go. That's not easy. It goes against your emotions, your logic, and sometimes even the opinions of people around you. But impossibility is not meant to push you away from God. It is meant to push you away from God. It is meant to pull you closer to him. When you reach the point where you realize you cannot do it on your own, you begin to seek him differently. Your prayers become deeper. Your dependence becomes stronger. Your focus begins to shift from the problem to his power. And in that shift, something begins to change. Not just around you, but within you. Because before God changes your situation, he often changes your perspective. He teaches you to see beyond what is visible. He strengthens you to endure what feels unbearable. He builds your trust so that when the breakthrough finally comes, your faith is not fragile. It is firm, and when God moves in an impossible situation, he does it in such a way that there is no doubt. No one can say it was coincidence. No one can say it just worked out. It becomes clear that something supernatural has taken place. That's why you cannot afford to give up in the middle of what looks impossible. That's why you cannot let fear convince you that it's over. Because what you are facing right now may not be the end of your story. It may be the setup for something greater than you ever imagined. Impossibility is not your enemy. It is the environment where God does his best work. There comes a point in every person's life where their own ability reaches its limit. You've done everything you know to do. You've tried every strategy, exhausted every option, and given all the effort you have. Yet the situation remains unchanged. It is in that moment when your strength runs out that frustration begins to rise. You start questioning, doubting, and wondering if anything will ever shift. But what feels like the end to you is often the exact place where something greater is about to begin. Because God begins where human ability ends, we are naturally wired to depend on what we can control. We trust our skills, our plans, our experiences, and our understanding. And as long as those things seem to be working, we feel secure. But the danger in relying only on human ability is that it limits what we believe is possible. It keeps us operating within boundaries that were never meant to define us. God will often allow you to reach the edge of your own capacity, not to leave you there, but to show you that his capacity is far greater. When you still have options, you tend to rely on them. When you still have strength, you lean on it. But when everything stripped away, when there is nothing left to depend on, your focus begins to shift. You start looking beyond yourself. You start recognizing that if something is going to change, it won't be because of you alone. That realization is not weakness, it is positioning. Because as long as you believe you can handle everything on your own, you will never fully experience what God can do. Self-reliance can quietly become a barrier to divine intervention. Not because God is unwilling to move, but because you are unwilling to release control. There is a difference between doing your part and trying to play God's part. Your responsibility is obedience. His responsibility is outcome. And when you finally let go of the need to control everything, you create space for him to work in ways you never could. This is where faith becomes real, not when everything is going well, not when the answers are clear, but when you are standing in a place where your ability is no longer enough. Faith is choosing to trust when you have no evidence. Faith is choosing to trust when you have no evidence. It is believing that something is happening even when you cannot see it. It is in that space of surrender that God begins to move. Not always in ways you expect and not always on your timeline, but always with purpose. Sometimes he will open a door you didn't even know existed. Sometimes he will bring help from a place you never considered. Sometimes he will change the situation, and other times he will change you within the situation. But in every case, his power becomes evident precisely because your ability was insufficient. And that's the point. If you could have done it on your own, you would have. If your strength was enough, the story would end with you. But when God steps in at the point of your limitation, the outcome carries a different weight. It carries a sense of wonder, a sense of humility, and a recognition that what has happened, Ned, goes beyond human explanation. That's why you cannot be discouraged when you reach the end of yourself. That place is not meant to break you. It is meant to redirect you. It is an invitation to trust deeper, to depend more fully, and to recognize that your limitations are not a problem for God. In fact, they are often the very reason he chooses to move, because when your strength is gone and your options are few, his power has room to be revealed. So instead of seeing your limitations as a setback, begin to see them as a setup for something that cannot be explained by effort alone, a setup for a breakthrough that goes beyond logic, a setup for a moment where you will look back and realize that what you thought was the end was actually the beginning of something far greater. God does his greatest work in the places where human ability comes to an end. What you choose to focus on will always shape what you feel, how you think, and ultimately how you respond. Focus is not just about what you see with your eyes. It is about what you allow to take center stage in your mind. And when you are facing challenges, especially overwhelming ones, your focus becomes the deciding factor between fear and faith. If your attention is locked onto the problem, then the problem will begin to grow in your perception. It may not actually be getting bigger, but in your mind, it starts to dominate everything. You replay it over and over, analyze every negative possibility, and before long, it feels heavier than it truly is. Fear thrives in that environment. The more you focus on what's wrong, the more powerless you begin to feel. But when your focus shifts, everything starts to change. Faith does not mean ignoring reality. It does not mean pretending the problem doesn't exist. It means choosing to see beyond the problem. It means acknowledging the difficulty, but not allowing it to define your expectation. Because what you magnify will determine your mindset. If you magnify the obstacle, you minimize your hope. But if you magnify God, you minimize your fear. This is where many people struggle. It's not that they don't believe in God, it's that their focus is constantly pulled back to the problem. Every conversation, every thought, every moment of silence becomes filled with worry. And without realizing it, they are feeding fear while starving their faith. You cannot expect faith to grow if fear is what you're consistently nurturing. Focus is like fuel. Whatever you give your attention to will gain strength in your life. If you keep focusing on what you don't have, discouragement will grow. If you keep focusing on what could go wrong, anxiety will increase. But if you begin to focus on God's power, his faithfulness, and his ability to intervene, something shifts internally. You begin to stand differently. You begin to think differently. You begin to respond differently because your perspective has changed. The situation may still be the same, but your view of it is no longer the same, and that matters more than you think. Because how you see something determines how you handle it. When your focus is on the problem, you will react with panic. You will rush decisions, speak out of fear, and sometimes even give up too soon. But when your focus is on God, you respond with confidence. You become steady. You are able to wait, to trust, and to move with wisdom instead of emotion. That doesn't mean fear won't try to show up. It will. Negative thoughts will come. Doubt will knock at your door. But you have a choice in that moment. You can either entertain those thoughts or redirect your focus. And that choice is powerful. Because every time you shift your focus back to God, you are reinforcing your faith. You are reminding yourself that your situation is not greater than his power. You are declaring, even if it's quietly within your heart, that what you see is not the final word. Over time, that consistent focus begins to build something strong within you. It builds resilience. It builds trust. It builds an unshakable belief that no matter what comes your way, you are not facing it alone. And when your faith grows, fear loses its grip. It may still try to speak, but it no longer has authority over your decisions. It no longer controls your emotions the way it once did, because your focus has shifted from what is temporary to what is eternal, from what is unchanging to what is unchanging. So even when the situation looks impossible, you are able to stand firm, Not because the problem has disappeared, but because your confidence is no longer tied to the problem. It is rooted in something greater. Focus determines direction, and direction determines outcome. If you keep looking at what's wrong, you will move toward defeat. But if you keep looking toward God, you will move toward hope, strength, and ultimately breakthrough. Waiting is one of the most difficult experiences a person can go through, especially when you are believing for something significant. You've prayed, you've trusted, you've held on, and yet nothing seems to be changing. Days turn into weeks, weeks turn into months, and the silence begins to feel heavy. In that space, it's easy to come to one conclusion. Maybe it's not going to happen. But what feels like a delay is not always a denial. The challenge is that we measure timing based on our expectations, while God operates according to his purpose. We want things to happen quickly, clearly, and without complications. We prefer immediate answers and visible progress. But God is not rushed, and he is not pressured by our timelines. He sees what we cannot see, and he understands what we do not yet understand. So when something doesn't happen when you expect it to, it doesn't mean it's not going to happen at all. It often means there is something still being prepared. Sometimes the delay is about the situation itself. There are pieces that need to come together, details that need to align, and circumstances that need to shift before the outcome can unfold the right way. If it happened too early, it wouldn't be complete. It wouldn't be stable. It wouldn't carry the fullness of what it was meant to be of. Other times, the delay is about you, not as a punishment, but as a process. There are moments when God is more concerned with preparing you than he is with delivering the outcome. Because if the blessing arrives before you are ready, it can become overwhelming instead of uplifted. It can create pressure instead of peace. So in the waiting, something is being developed within you: patience, strength, wisdom, and a deeper level of trust. And that development matters because what you become in the process is just as important as what you receive at the end of it. The problem is that we often interpret delay through the lens of doubt. We assume that because we don't see movement, nothing is happening. But just because something is not visible does not mean it is not active. There are things taking place behind the scenes that you may never fully understand, but they are essential to the bigger picture. God's timing is not random. It is intentional. Every moment, every pause, every stretch of waiting has a purpose attached to it. Even when it feels uncomfortable, even when it tests your patience, even when it challenges your faith, it is not wasted time. It is preparation time. And preparation often requires stillness. Stillness forces you to trust without constant reassurance. It teaches you to rely on God without needing immediate praise. It stretches your faith beyond what is convenient and brings you to a place where your confidence is no longer based on what you see, but on who you believe. That kind of faith is not built overnight. It is formed in the waiting.
But here's where many people struggle. They allow the delay to change their attitude. What began with hope slowly turns into frustration.
What started with faith begins to weaken under the weight of uncertainty. And if they are not careful, they will walk away from what they once believed simply because it didn't happen when they expected it to. That's why your perspective in the waiting matters so much. If you see the delay as rejection, you will become discouraged. But if you see it as preparation, you will remain hopeful. You will understand that something is still unfolding, even if you cannot yet see it. And when the timing finally comes together, it will make sense in a way that it couldn't have before. You will realize that if it had happened earlier, certain things would have been missing. Certain lessons would not have been learned. Certain strengths would not have been developed. And the outcome would not have carried the same depth, the same stability, or the same impact. God is not late. He is precise. He moves at the exact moment when everything is aligned, not just around you, but within you. And when that moment comes, what once felt delayed will suddenly feel right on time. So instead of losing faith in the waiting, lean into it. Instead of assuming the worst, continue to trust. Because delay does not mean denial, it often means that something greater is still being prepared. There is something powerful about a breakthrough that cannot be explained by human effort alone. When a situation shifts in a way that defies logic, when doors open that no one could have forced open, when provision shows up at the exact mile, it is needed. It creates a moment that goes beyond relief. It becomes a testimony. A testimony is more than just a good outcome. It is evidence of something greater at work. Many people desire the testimony, but few are willing to go through the process that produces it. Because every real testimony begins with a test. It begins with uncertainty, pressure, and moments where it seems like things could go either way. It begins in places where your faith is stretched and your patience is challenged. And in those moments, it doesn't feel like a story you'll want to tell later. It feels like something you just want to escape. But the very thing you are trying to get out of may be the very thing that is shaping what God is about to bring through your life. Because a breakthrough that comes without a struggle rarely carries depth. It may bring temporary excitement, but it doesn't build lasting conviction. On the other hand, when you've had to hold on, when you've had to trust in uncertainty, when you've had to trust in certainty, when you've had to stand when it would have been easier to walk away, that breakthrough carries weight. It becomes personal. You don't just talk about what happened, you talk about what it took to keep believing when nothing made sense. You remember the nights of doubt, the moments of silence, the times when you questioned everything. And then when things finally shift, you realize that what has happened cannot be credited to luck or coincidence. It points to something greater. That is what transforms a moment into a testimony, because a testimony reveals not just the outcome, but the source behind the outcome. It highlights that there was a power at work beyond what could be seen. And when people hear it, it does something within them. It gives them hope. It reminds them that what seems impossible in their life may not be impossible after all. Your breakthrough is not just about you. It carries the potential to impact others. There are people who will see your story and find the strength to keep going in their own situations. There are people who will hear what you've been through and realize that they are not alone. There are people who will begin to believe again simply because they saw what happened in your life. But that kind of impact only comes when the breakthrough is clearly connected to God's involvement. If everything can be explained by human effort, then the story ends with you. But when the outcome goes beyond what effort alone could produce, it becomes clear that something divine has taken place. That's why the process matters. Every delay, every challenge, every moment of uncertainty adds to the depth of the testimony. It creates a contrast between what was and what is. It shows how far things have come and how unlikely the outcome once seemed. And that contrast is what makes the testimony powerful. It shows that even when things looked hopeless, something was still happening behind the scenes. It shows that even when it felt like nothing was changing, progress was being made in ways that could not be seen at the time. So when the breakthrough finally comes, it is not just about celebration, it is about recognition.
Recognition that God was present in every step. Recognition that his timing, his power, and his plan were at work, even when it wasn't obvious. Recognition that what once felt like a struggle has now become a story worth telling. And that story has purpose.
Because testimonies are meant to be shared, they are meant to remind, to encourage, and to strengthen. They are meant to point people beyond circumstances and toward the possibility of something greater. So when your breakthrough comes, don't just move on from it. Remember it, reflect on it, let it serve as a reminder of what is possible when God steps in. Because once the impossible becomes possible in your life, it doesn't just change your situation, it gives you a testimony that can change someone else's perspective. There are times when the journey doesn't just challenge your strength, it challenges your endurance. It's not about a single moment of faith or a one-time decision to trust. It's about continuing to stand when everything around you suggests that standing is no longer worth it. This is where perseverance becomes essential. Because what God is doing is not always instant, but is always intentional. Endurance is not passive, it is active trust over time. Anyone can believe when things are moving quickly. Anyone can stay encouraged when progress is visible. But real faith is revealed in the moments when nothing seems to be happening, when prayers feel unanswered, and when the situation remains unchanged despite your effort and belief. That's where many people begin to lose momentum. Not because they don't care, but because they grow tired. And that's understandable. Waiting can drain you. Repeating the same prayers can feel exhausting. Holding on to hope in the face of silence can feel like carrying a weight that never gets lighter. But what you have to understand is that endurance is not about ignoring how you feel. It's about not allowing your feelings to dictate your decision to keep going. Because feelings change, but purpose remains. There is a reason why the process takes time. Growth does not happen instantly. Strength is not built in comfort. And faith does not mature without pressure. Every moment that requires you to keep going despite difficulty is shaping something within you that cannot be developed any other way. You are being strengthened in ways you cannot yet fully see. Endurance builds resilience. It teaches you how to stand firm when things are unstable. It develops a depth in your faith that is not easily shaken. It moves you from surface level belief to something rooted and unmovable. And that kind of faith is powerful because it is not dependent on circumstances. It is grounded in trust. But here's the challenge. Endurance often feels like you're not making progress. When you're in the middle of a long process, it can seem like you're stuck, like nothing is changing, nothing is improving, and nothing is moving forward. But just because progress is not visible does not mean it is not happening. Some of the most important work is done beneath the surface where it cannot be seen immediately. Just like roots grow underground before anything appears above ground, your strength is being developed in hidden ways. And when the time comes, what has been built in private will become visible in public. This is why quitting too early can cost you more than you realize. If you walk away in the middle of the process, you may never see the outcome that was already in motion. You may never experience the breakthrough that was closer than it seemed, not because it wasn't coming, but because endurance was required to reach it. Staying does not always feel rewarding in the moment, but it is necessary for what is ahead. And sometimes endurance is not about taking big steps. It's about taking small ones. It's about choosing to pray one more time, to believe one more day, to hold on just a little longer. Those small decisions add up. They create a consistency that keeps you moving forward, even when the progress feels slow. Over time, that consistency becomes strength, and that strength positions you to receive what you've been waiting for. Because when the breakthrough comes, it's not just about the result, it's about who you become in the process. You're no longer the same person who started the journey. You've grown. You become attention. You have matured. They've developed a deeper understanding and a stronger faith, and that transformation is just as important as the outcome itself. So even when it feels long, even when it feels heavy, even when it feels like giving up would be easier, keep going. Not because it's easy, but because it's necessary. Because what is being built in you right now is preparing you for something greater than what you can currently see. Endurance is the bridge between promise and fulfillment. There are moments when everything around you seems to contradict what you believe. You've prayed, you've trusted, you've held on to hope, yet the situation in front of you looks unchanged, or even worse than before. In those moments, the greatest battle is not happening around you. It's happening within you. It's the battle between what you see and what you choose to believe. Because at some point, your faith has to go beyond feelings and circumstances. It's easy to say you trust when things are going well. It's easy to speak positively when doors are opening and progress is visible. But when the opposite happens, when doors close, when delays stretch longer than expected, when nothing seems to move, your belief is tested at a deeper level, and that's where consistency in faith becomes critical. Not a temporary belief, not an emotional reaction, but a steady rooted confidence that does not shift with every change in circumstance. Because if your faith is only strong when things are favorable, it will collapse the moment pressure increases. True faith is not built on what is happening. It is built on who God is. That means even when you don't understand, you still trust. Even when you don't see results, you still believe. Even when everything feels uncertain, you hold on to what you know is true rather than what you currently feel. But that kind of faith doesn't come naturally. It has to be developed. And it is often developed in seasons where nothing seems to make sense. In those seasons, you are faced with a choice every single day. You can allow doubt to take over, or you can intentionally remind yourself of what you believe. You can focus on the uncertainty, or you can focus on the unchanging nature of God. You can let your thoughts drift toward fear, or you can bring them back to faith. That choice.
Loving you alone feels so beautiful, and yet it hurts the most. You became my quiet sunrise, the dream I never dared to say. Every smile you gave so freely took my breath a little away. I held this love like fragile glass, so precious, soft and true. But every beat inside my heart was only reaching out to you. Unspoken love is sweet and painful, like honey mixed with rain. A tender hope I hold so tightly, while it slowly breaks me. Loving you from just one side now leaves my soul in silent blue. 'Cause the deeper that I fall alone, the lonelier I do. I can't blame my heart for choosing someone it could never keep. So I smile through hidden heartache and love you quietly. Unspoken love is sweet and painful, like honey mixed with rain. A tender hope I hold so tightly, while it slowly breaks me. Loving you from just one side now leaves my soul in silent blue. 'Cause the deeper that I fall alone, the lonelier I do. Maybe loving you in silence is the closest I can stay, though it leaves behind a sorrow that may never fade away. Unspoken love is sweet and painful, like honey mixed with rain. A tender hope I hold so tightly, while it slowly breaks me. Loving you from just one side now leaves my soul in silent blue. 'Cause the deeper that I fall